The roar of 250,000 voices shakes the very stones of the Circus Maximus. This is the sound of ancient Rome at play, a civilization that mastered the art of spectacle on a staggering scale. We often picture legions and emperors, but the true heartbeat of the city pulsed during its giant festivals. These were not simple parties, they were colossal feats of engineering, finance, and political cunning, where the fate of empires could hinge on the success of a single chariot race. By the end of this journey, you will understand the hidden blueprint that allowed Rome to entertain and control 1 million people at a time. How did they feed endless crowds without refrigeration? What secret machinery flooded an arena for naval battles? We are pulling back the curtain on history's greatest showrunners to reveal the astonishing reality behind the spectacle. What does it truly take to build a world of wonder, stone by stone and coin by coin? To understand the sheer scale of these events, we must first step into the mind of a Roman citizen. Their entire year was not marked by quiet weeks and busy months as we know it, but by a relentless, colorful parade of mandatory celebration. The Roman calendar was not a blank slate. It was a pre-printed blueprint for spectacle, a master schedule handed down by tradition and enforced by the state. Nearly 1 day in 3 was officially designated for some form of public holiday or religious observance. This system was built on a foundation of feriae, a word meaning holidays but carrying the weight of sacred obligation. There were 3 main types. Feriae publicae were the grand state holidays, funded by the treasury and required for all citizens to observe. Think of them as the blockbuster events, the ones that shut down the courts and filled the streets. Then came feriae privatae, private family celebrations for births, deaths, or household gods. But the most intriguing were the feriae imperativae, special holidays declared on the spot, often to celebrate a major military victory. A general returns triumphant, and with a single announcement, the entire city gets an unexpected day off, a spontaneous injection of public joy ordered from the top down. This calendar created a predictable, exhilarating rhythm. Life moved from one festival to the next. In the cold of February, you had the wild, chaotic Lupercalia, where young men ran through the streets striking women with strips of goat hide in a bizarre ritual believed to promote fertility. As summer waned, September brought the Ludi Romani, the Roman Games, which could stretch for over 2 weeks with chariot races, theatrical performances, and public feasts. And then as the year darkened in December, the social order itself was turned upside down during Saturnalia. For several days, masters served their slaves, gambling was permitted in public, and a general spirit of mischief ruled the city. Some festivals were brief, solemn affairs at a single temple. Others were city-wide marathons of entertainment. This constant cycle served a profound purpose. It prevented boredom and unrest, yes, but more importantly, it constantly reinforced Roman identity, reminding every citizen from senator to street vendor that they were part of a shared story, a divine mission with the gods as their audience. The calendar was the first and most crucial piece of logistical planning. It told the city not just when to celebrate, but what to celebrate, and more importantly, it ensured there was always another spectacle on the horizon. This relentless calendar of celebration was a machine, and every machine needs its operators. The sheer scale of these festivals required a complex web of political ambition, religious authority, and personal fortune. At the very top sat the Senate, the ultimate board of directors. Their role was to authorize the official calendar, approve the staggering budgets from the state treasury, and set the dates that would bring the entire city to a standstill. But the hands-on work, the terrifying responsibility for success or catastrophic failure, fell to individual men gambling their entire futures. These were the magistrates, specifically the aediles. Think of an aedile not as a bland bureaucrat, but as a combination of a Hollywood producer, a city mayor, and a desperate politician on the brink of his make-or-break moment. Elected for a single year, their core duty was to organize the Ludi, the public games. The state provided a basic subsidy, but it was never enough. The aedile was expected to dig deep into his own family fortune to top up the budget, to secure the best gladiators, the fastest horses from North Africa, the most exotic beasts, and the most lavish public feasts. Why would anyone take on such a financially ruinous job? The answer is pure Roman politics. A spectacular festival was a direct bribe to the populace. a dazzling display of generosity meant to win the hearts and votes of the citizenry. A successful games organizer could see his name chanted by hundreds of thousands, guaranteeing a swift rise to the higher offices of praetor and consul. But the flip side was a political abyss. A poorly funded show, a collapsed stage, or a riot over bad seating could end a career in disgrace and bankruptcy. It was the ultimate high-stakes public relations campaign. Alongside this political machinery operated the ancient, unwavering authority of religion. No festival could begin without the correct rituals, overseen by priestly colleges like the pontifices. These were not just ceremonial figures, they were the guardians of tradition, ensuring every sacrifice was performed perfectly, every prayer to Jupiter Optimus Maximus was correctly recited. Their approval was the final seal without which the games could not proceed, a constant reminder that even the most ambitious politician was subject to the gods and their earthly representatives. So the next time you picture the roar of the Colosseum, see beyond the sand and the swords, see the aedile in the front row, sweating not from the sun, but from the knowledge that his entire family's wealth and his political destiny are riding on the performance of a single gladiator or the mood of the crowd. The spectacle was entertainment, but its organization was the brutal engine of Roman power. The true cost of a Roman festival could bankrupt a modern nation. To grasp the economics, we must move beyond simple ticket sales because for most events there were none. Admission was free, a right of every Roman citizen. This transformed the funding from a business model into a complex web of political patronage and state power. The primary source was the aerarium, the state treasury housed in the Temple of Saturn. Senators would allocate a base sum for an event, but this was merely a starting point, often described as woefully inadequate for the spectacle the people expected. The magistrates organizing the games, the aediles we met earlier, were then expected to pour their personal fortunes into the gap. For a man like Julius Caesar early in his career, this meant going into staggering debt to fund gladiatorial games so magnificent they used silver armor, simply to outdo his rivals and capture public favor. His gamble paid off, launching his political ascent, but it highlights the immense personal risk. Where else did the money come from? Conquest was a direct pipeline. A triumphant general returning from a campaign was expected to dedicate a portion of the spoils, the manubii, to fund public games or build monuments. This transformed plundered gold from Gaul or Egypt into a day of chariot races for the Roman mob, a brilliant feedback loop where military victory directly purchased domestic peace. Wealthy private patrons also donated, seeking social prestige or divine favor, and in the provinces, local taxes and tributes could be funneled directly to Rome to pay for the capital's entertainments, a constant reminder of who held the power. Now follow that river of gold to where it was spent. The expenses were breathtaking. First, the stage itself. While permanent structures like the Circus Maximus existed, many events required massive, temporary wooden grandstands built and dismantled each year, a huge undertaking in carpentry and labor. Then the talent. Top gladiators were valuable assets, commanded high fees and required training, housing, and medical care. Exotic animals were perhaps the most extravagant cost. Capturing, transporting, and keeping a lion, bear, or crocodile alive from the frontiers of the empire to the center of Rome was a logistical nightmare with a colossal price tag. Procuring food for public banquets was another mountain to climb. For the Ludi Romani, the state might distribute thousands of baskets of bread alongside wine and meat to citizens. This required a supply chain stretching across the Mediterranean. Finally, no expense was spared on the spectacle itself. Elaborate costumes for priests and performers, gilded decorations for temples and parade floats, and even special perfumes to scent the air in the theaters. Every denarius spent was a visible statement of power and generosity. This was not an economy of efficiency, but an economy of awe, where financial weight was publicly converted into political gravity. With a mountain of treasure secured, the next challenge was simple yet monumental. How do you fill a city for an event when the only broadcast system is the human voice? In a world before printing presses, radio, or even reliable mail, the Roman publicity machine had to be equally ingenious and relentless. The official campaign began with a single, powerful figure in the forum, the praetor. Far more than a simple town crier, The Preco was a state-appointed herald, a living loudspeaker with a trained voice that could cut through the din of the marketplace. Standing on the rostra, the great speaker's platform, he would announce the dates of the upcoming games, the presiding magistrate's name, and the promised highlights. His words were official, carrying the full authority of the Senate and the people of Rome, but his voice could only carry so far. For permanence and wider reach, the announcement was carved into wooden tablets or painted onto whitewashed boards called alba. These were the edicta, official edicts, and they were posted in the most public spaces imaginable. You would find them fastened to the columns of the Basilica Julia, near the entrance to the public baths, and especially in the Forum itself, where every citizen eventually passed by. They served as the city's constant, silent bulletin board, yet official channels were only part of the story. The city's walls themselves began to talk. Informal graffiti acted as a buzzing, underground network of hype. Shop owners might paint notices on their exterior walls advertising special deals for the festival crowds. Supporters of a particular gladiator school or a favored chariot racing faction, the Blues or the Greens, would scrawl slogans and boasts in public thoroughfares. Paridius is champion of the Resciarii, or the Greens will conquer. This created a layer of public conversation and rivalry that built anticipation from the ground up. But the invitation did not stop at the city walls. The news traveled along the empire's greatest asset, its roads. Official messengers carried copies of the edicta to major provincial capitals. In cities like Carthage, Ephesus, or Alexandria, the local magistrates would have the announcement proclaimed, creating a ripple effect across the Mediterranean. This was an open invitation to the empire. Merchants knew to schedule their shipments to arrive in Rome for the bustling crowds. Wealthy provincial families planned pilgrimages to the capital for the spectacle. Even common citizens might save for years for the chance to witness the games in the legendary Circus Maximus. As the date drew nearer, the entire fabric of the city began to change, and you could feel the anticipation thicken in the air. The riverbanks grew crowded with barges unloading exotic animals in reinforced cages, their roars and smells hinting at the dramas to come. The clang of hammers from the campus, Martius, signaled the construction of temporary theaters and practice grounds. The price of lodging spiked and street vendors began stocking extra lamps and festival trinkets. Rumors flew through the taverns and barbershops about which gladiator was in top form, or whether the new team of Spanish stallions for the Reds was as fast as promised. This slow, visible buildup was a masterclass in suspense. From the formal pronouncement of the Preco to the chatter in the streets, every Roman, from senator to slave, was drawn into the unfolding story, knowing that their city was preparing to transform once again into the stage for the greatest show on earth. The announcement had been made, the treasury emptied, and the hype was now a palpable buzz in every street, but the city itself remained stubbornly solid, made of stone and crowded neighborhoods. The real magic, the sheer organizational muscle, was about to show itself in a whirlwind of physical transformation. Rome had to become a shapeshifter, morphing from a dense urban center into a sprawling, functional festival ground capable of hosting a population that could double in size almost overnight. This was not a gentle change, it was an urban metamorphosis, loud, dusty, and breathtakingly efficient. The most visible sign was the sudden forest of timber rising in every open space. While the Circus Maximus and later the Colosseum offered permanent stone seating, they were the exceptions. For most events, especially theatrical performances and many gladiatorial games, the seating was built from scratch. Teams of carpenters and laborers would descend upon the Forum Romanum or the Campus Martius, constructing immense temporary grandstands known as the cavea. These were not rickety bleachers, they were multi-tiered wooden auditoriums, engineered to hold thousands of people safely, often rising several stories high with supporting scaffolds and ramps for access. The sound of hammers and saws would dominate the district for weeks, a constant percussion section to the festival's overture. Alongside the seating came the skini, the elaborate stage buildings for plays and musical contests. These were temporary palaces of painted canvas and wood, adorned with columns, statues, and intricate backdrops that could depict anything from a royal Theban palace to a simple country cottage. Overnight, the civic heart of Rome could become an open-air theater district, but you cannot entertain 250,000 people on spectacle alone. They need to eat, drink, and shop. This meant the spontaneous eruption of a massive temporary marketplace. Around the edges of the festival grounds, a city within a city would spring up. Sturdy stalls were erected by vendors selling everything from simple sausages and cheap wine to religious trinkets, festival masks, and souvenirs. The air would fill with the competing smells of roasting meat, frying fish, and sweet pastries. It was a carnival atmosphere, but one born of meticulous planning. Authorities designated specific zones for these markets to prevent total chaos, creating buzzing commercial arteries that fed both the crowds and the local economy. Then came the most delicate task, managing the human tide. Imagine the narrow streets of Rome, already cramped, now flooded with visitors from across Italy and the Empire. Crowd control was a matter of public safety on a colossal scale. The Romans used a system of ropes and temporary wooden barriers to create designated pathways and queues, channeling people like water through aqueducts. The responsibility for maintaining order fell not to a dedicated police force as we know it, but to the vigiles. Originally established as night watchmen and firefighters, the vigiles became the festival's frontline peacekeepers. They patrolled the packed avenues, broke up fights, directed lost visitors, and were ever watchful for the greatest threat of all in a city of wooden structures: fire. Their presence was a constant, subtle reminder that even in the midst of sanctioned revelry, the hand of Roman authority was never far away. Finally, there was the invisible, unglamorous, yet utterly critical problem of sanitation. A city's infrastructure is tested most severely not by its monuments, but by its waste. The sudden influx of hundreds of thousands of people presented a staggering challenge. The existing network of public latrines, often elegant marble benches with flowing water beneath, would be overwhelmed. The solution was both practical and expansive. Temporary latrine facilities were constructed, simple but functional to handle the surge. More importantly, a massive, coordinated cleanup operation swung into action. Teams of slaves and public workers, operating on a strict schedule, were tasked with the relentless removal of garbage, food waste, and other refuse. They worked through the night, carting away the physical evidence of the day's festivities so that each morning, the city could present a somewhat fresh face to the new crowds. This unseen labor was the true foundation of the festival's success. It prevented disease, minimized discomfort, and allowed the spectacle to continue day after day without descending into a squalid, unhealthy mess. The transformation of Rome was a feat of engineering, not just of structures, but of society itself, proving that the empire's genius lay as much in managing filth and flow as it did in crafting epic drama. But all this engineering and crowd control would mean nothing if the people were hungry. 250,000 spectators is not just an audience. It is a small nation that needs to be fed 3 times a day, every day, for the duration of the games. This was the ultimate logistical puzzle, and the Romans solved it with a system that was part welfare, part spectacle, and entirely dependent on the power of the Mediterranean itself. The foundation was the annona, the famous grain dole. This was a citizen's right, a monthly ration of wheat provided by the state, sourced from the fertile fields of Egypt and North Africa. During a major festival, this system went into overdrive. The warehouses along the Tiber River, the Horia, would be stocked to bursting, and distributions were often increased or scheduled specifically to coincide with the games, ensuring no citizen would go hungry while celebrating the state. Yet grain alone does not make a feast. The festival menu required a far more ambitious grocery list. Think of the supply chain as a map of the empire coming alive. Heavy clay amphorae stacked like cordwood in the holds of ships carried rich wine from the vineyards of Campania. Huge quantities of olive oil, the butter of the ancient world, sailed from the groves of southern Spain. Exotic spices like pepper, ginger, and cinnamon made the long, perilous journey from the distant east, across the Indian Ocean and through the Red Sea, their value worth their weight in gold by the time they reached a Roman kitchen. And then there was the meat. For the grand public banquets, the epulum publicum, the state required a staggering number of animals. Herds of cattle, flocks of sheep, and squealing pigs were driven for miles along the very roads the spectators had traveled, converging on the city in a slow, dusty, living river of provisions. Many of these animals were not just food, they were the centerpiece of the most important festival ritual, the public sacrifice, A priest would perform the sacred rites, offering the animal to the gods, and then the practical Romans got to work. The carcass was butchered with efficient precision. The choicest portions were burned on the altar for the deities, but the rest, the vast majority of the animal, was cooked and distributed to the people. This was a powerful symbol, a direct, tangible connection between religious observance and public benefit. You were literally eating the blessing of the state. Of course, the state-sponsored meat was a special occasion. For daily sustenance, the crowds relied on a thriving, chaotic ecosystem of private enterprise. Everywhere you looked, Papani, the Roman taverns and cookshops would be doing a roaring trade. Their charcoal braziers glowed day and night, filling the air with the sizzle of sausages, the smell of frying fish in garum sauce, and the sweet aroma of honey cakes. Street vendors wove through the packed thoroughfares, their trays laden with simple, portable food, nuts, dried fruits, and cheap wine diluted with water. This was the true culinary engine of the festival, a decentralized, responsive network that fed the masses on demand. It turned the entire city into an open-air banquet hall, where the smell of sacrifice from the temple mingled with the smoke from 1,000 street grills, a sensory testament to an empire that could fill both the stomach and the imagination. The smell of roasting meat from 1,000 street vendors was suddenly overpowered by a sweeter, more solemn scent. As dawn broke on the first official day of the games, the air filled with the sharp, clean aroma of incense and burning herbs. This was the signal. Before a single chariot could race or a gladiator could raise his sword, the city had to secure the favor of the gods. Every major festival day began not with entertainment, but with a sacred obligation, the sacrificium. The success of the entire event, the safety of the crowds, even the fate of the empire, was believed to hinge on this precise, ritualized exchange with the divine. In a world where gods were thought to intervene directly in human affairs, pleasing them was the most critical piece of logistical planning. The chosen animal, perhaps a pure white bull for Jupiter or a lamb for a gentler deity, was led to the altar. It was washed, adorned with ribbons and garlands, its horns sometimes gilded. A priest with meticulous care would sprinkle sacred meal on its head before a swift, practiced stroke ensured the sacrifice was acceptable. The organs were examined by a haruspex, a special priest who read the future in the entrails. A healthy liver meant the gods were pleased and the games could proceed. A flawed one could cause panic, delay, or even the cancellation of the day's events. This was the high-stakes moment invisible to most of the crowd, the backstage ritual upon which the entire public spectacle depended. With divine approval secured, the spectacle could formally begin, and it did so with a pageant that turned the entire city into a moving theater. This was the Pompa, the grand procession that would march from the capital, through the heart of the forum, and all the way to the venue, be it the Circus Maximus or a temporary arena. Imagine the order of this living parade. At the very front came young boys of noble birth, marching with a pride that belied their age. Behind them, the heartbeat of the procession, the musicians. The shrill cry of the tibia, a double red pipe, mixed with the deep resonance of brass horns and the rhythmic pulse of drums, setting a tempo that the whole city could feel in their chests. Then came the dancers, their movements athletic and precise, whirling and leaping to the driving music, their bodies telling ancient stories of victory and divine favor. The core of the procession was a traveling temple. Statues of the gods themselves were brought out from their sanctuaries, placed upon ornate litters, and carried on the shoulders of priests. Jupiter Optimus Maximus, with his stern marble gaze, would lead, followed by Juno, Minerva, and a host of other deities invited to witness the games. These were not mere effigies, they were the divine guests of honor, and their passage demanded reverence. Following the gods came the sacrificial animals from the morning's ritual, now clean and decorated, a moving reminder of the covenant just sealed. Finally, the human architects of the day appeared, the magistrates and senators. They wore their official robes, the broad purple stripe of the senator's toga gleaming in the sun, their faces set in expressions of solemn dignity. For the presiding aedile, this was his triumphant walk, the moment he presented himself to the people as their generous benefactor, under the watchful eyes of both the gods and his political rivals. The streets, already packed, would part as this river of color, sound, and sanctity flowed through. Citizens showered the procession with flowers, offered prayers, and fell into step behind it, a human tide swelling as it moved toward the arena. This was not just a commute to the games. It was a powerful, deliberate ritual that physically connected the religious heart of the city with the place of entertainment, binding the sacred to the secular and reminding every single participant, from the highest priest to the lowest street sweeper, that what they were about to witness was a gift from the gods, delivered through the hands of Rome's ruling class. The thunder of the crowd was still to come, but first the city had to walk together in a parade of piety and power. The procession's final steps delivered the gods and the cheering masses to the mouth of a canyon built by men. The Circus Maximus was not a stadium. It was a geological fact carved into the valley between the Palatine and Aventine hills. Its sheer scale defies easy understanding. Think of the largest modern sports arena you can imagine. Now multiply its capacity by 15. This single structure could hold over 150,000 people, a number equal to the entire population of a major Roman provincial capital, all packed into one space for a single purpose. The noise within was not a roar, but a constant physical thunder that vibrated in your bones. This was the temple of speed, the epicenter of Rome's most dangerous and popular obsession, chariot racing. At the heart of the spectacle was a rivalry that divided the city more than politics ever could. The fans did not cheer for individual drivers or horses, but for one of four corporations known as the factions. There were the blues, the greens, the reds, and the whites. Think of them as colossal, ancient sports franchises, but with a fanaticism that made modern football hooliganism look polite. Each faction owned its own stables, trained its own drivers, bred its own horses, and wore its distinctive colors. The blues and greens were the superpowers, commanding the vast majority of fan support, their rivalry so intense it sometimes spilled into city-wide riots. To be a fan was to wear a color like a tribal tattoo. You would live, eat, and breathe for your faction, betting your wages on its success and seeing its victories as a personal triumph. This system transformed a simple race into a proxy war, where the hopes and angers of hundreds of thousands were projected onto the track. The drama was orchestrated with brutal precision. All eyes fixed on the Imperial box. When the presiding magistrate was ready, he did not fire a gun or blow a whistle. He simply dropped a white cloth, the mappa, onto the sand of the track. That was the signal. The gates sprang open and up to 12 chariots, each pulled by a team of 4 horses, exploded onto the course. The goal was to complete 7 frantic laps around the long central divider, the spina. This barrier was not a simple line. It was an ornate obstacle course adorned with statues, obelisks, and turning posts at each end. And here lay the deadliest danger. Navigating the tight turns at full speed with a dozen other chariots jostling for the inside lane was a recipe for spectacular disaster. The Latin word for this wreck was naufragium, a shipwreck, and it was a tragically common sight. Wood splintered, horses screamed, and drivers were trampled or dragged, all to the roaring delight or horrified gasps of the crowd. The driver who survived this gauntlet and finished first achieved instant, though fleeting, glory. He was not a nobleman, but often a slave or a freedman, a man who risked his life for a chance at wealth and fame. His prize was a simple palm branch and a sack of gold. But the true reward was the adulation, the chance of his name echoing from the faceless sea of his faction's color. Yet this adoration was as fragile as his chariot's axle. In the stands, the passion of the fans was a volatile force. Arguments over a foul or a disputed finish could ignite into brawls that swept through the tiers. Supporters of rival factions would trade insults, then punches, sometimes escalating into full-blown clashes that required the vigiles to intervene with clubs. The chaos of the track was perfectly mirrored in the chaos of the stands, a controlled release of the city's competitive spirit that always danced on the edge of true anarchy. The circus was Rome in microcosm, a breathtaking display of engineering and organization, perpetually one misstep away from erupting into beautiful, terrifying bedlam. The thunder of the circus was matched only by the silence that could fall within the walls of the amphitheater. This was a different kind of theater, one where the drama was written in blood and sand. Here the spectacle was not about speed, but about survival in a grim and ritualized performance known as the munera. These gladiatorial games were not mere sport. They were a complex and brutal display of Roman values, courage, discipline, and the ultimate power over life and death. The stage was set not with chariots, but with a cast of characters as specialized as any modern sports team. First, the murmillo, named for the fish on his helmet crest. He was the heavyweight, a walking fortress encased in a large rectangular shield, a heavy greave on one leg, and a short stabbing sword. His opponent was often the chariot, the fisherman. This fighter was all about speed and cunning, armed with a weighted net to entangle his foe, a long trident to keep him at bay, and a small dagger for the final blow. They were a classic matchup, the slow armor tank against the agile, harrying hunter. Then there were the Threeks with his small, square shield and curved scimitar, and the Secutor, the chaser, whose smooth, round helmet was designed specifically to deflect the nets of the chariot. And we must not forget the Venators, the wild beast hunters who faced lions, bears, and leopards in the arena with only spears and courage. Each type was a piece in a deadly chess game, their equipment and styles creating specific, dramatic narratives for the crowd to follow. The day inside the amphitheater followed a strict, gruesome schedule, a three-act play of escalating violence. The morning was dedicated to the Venatians, the animal hunts. This was where the empire's exotic plunder came to life and to death. Leopards from Africa, bears from Germania, and even hippos from the Nile were driven into the arena to be hunted down by the Venators or set against each other in bloody combats. It was a display of human dominance over the wild world Rome had conquered. Then at midday came the darkest interlude. This was the time for public executions, the naumachia. Common criminals, prisoners of war, and Christians condemned for refusing to honor the Roman gods were brought out to die, often in elaborately cruel, mythological reenactments. A man might be dressed as the mythical Icarus, only to be hoisted into the air and dropped, or forced to play a scene where he was devoured by beasts. This was just as brutal public theater, a grim reminder of the price of defying Roman order. Finally, in the afternoon, the main event arrived. The gladiators themselves marched into the arena, saluting the sponsor of the games with the famous line, "We who are about to die salute you." The sponsor, known as the editor, was the master of ceremonies for this life and death drama. His role was immense. Months in advance, he had to negotiate with the managers of gladiator schools, the Ludi, to secure the best fighters, balancing different styles to create exciting matchups. He also had to commission the capture and delivery of the exotic animals for the morning hunts, a logistical nightmare we have already touched on. During the fights, the editor was more than a spectator, he was a judge. When a gladiator was defeated but not killed, the wounded man would raise a finger and surrender. The crowd would erupt, shouting their opinion. It was then that the editor would look to the people, gauging their mood before making his fateful gesture. The famous thumbs up or thumbs down is a Hollywood simplification. Historians believe the gesture was the pollice verso, the turned thumb. A thumb pressed flat against the fist likely meant spare him. A thumb jabbed outward like a sword likely meant death. With a simple movement of his hand, the editor ratified the will of the crowd, playing the part of a merciful emperor or a stern judge, his decision finalizing the story written in the sand. In the amphitheater, every cheer and every silence was a dialogue with death, orchestrated by one man for the catharsis of thousands. The sand of the amphitheater settled, but the festival's narrative was far from over. A different kind of performance awaited, one where the weapons were words and the battles were fought with wit. Beyond the racetrack and the arena, the grand theaters of Rome offered a crucial cultural counterpoint, a space for laughter, tears, and surprisingly pointed political critique. Here the crowds gathered not for blood, but for the intricate human dramas of comedy and tragedy, performed in venues that were marvels of ancient stagecraft. The Romans were voracious borrowers of culture, and their theatrical tradition was deeply rooted in Greek models. They staged adaptations of the great Greek tragedies by playwrights like Sophocles and Euripides, stories of doomed heroes and vengeful gods that explored the deepest questions of fate and morality. But they also embraced the boisterous, chaotic world of Greek New Comedy, which traded in mistaken identities, clever slaves, and romantic entanglements. These plays were performed in grand, permanent stone theaters like the Theater of Pompey, the first of its kind in Rome, which could seat thousands under the open sky. The experience was immersive and technically sophisticated. Actors wore exaggerated masks with built-in megaphones to project their voices, each mask representing a specific character type: the jealous old man, the cunning servant, the love-struck youth. Elaborate costumes and painted scenery set the stage, and the Romans were masters of mechanical effects. Trapdoors allowed gods to appear from below or ghosts to rise through the floor. A system of ropes and pulleys could lower an actor playing a deity from the top of the stage building, a spectacle known as the Deus Ex Machina. Theatrical thunder was simulated by rolling stones and metal drums backstage, and clever lighting using mirrors and torches could create the illusion of sunrise or a raging fire. Yet the true Roman genius lay in the forms they made their own. The most popular by far was mime. This was not the silent performance we think of today. Roman mime was a riotous spoken form of low comedy, often performed on temporary wooden stages in the bustling forum. It featured stock characters in absurd, frequently risque situations. The actors performed without masks, making their exaggerated facial expressions a key part of the humor. The plots were simple, the humor broad and physical, appealing directly to the masses. But then there was pantomime, a stark contrast. This was a high art form, a solo performance of breathtaking skill. A single masked dancer, accompanied by a chorus and musicians, would act out an entire mythological story through gesture and movement alone. The lead performer, the pantomimist, was a celebrity, renowned for his athleticism and expressiveness, capable of conveying complex narratives of love and war without uttering a single word. But within this vibrant cultural scene lurked a dangerous edge, the sharp sting of satire. The temporary, licensed chaos of the festival provided a unique cover for political commentary. Playwrights and performers could push boundaries here that would be unthinkable in the Senate House. Under the guise of fictional characters and ancient plots, they could mock current politicians, critique unpopular policies, and hold a mirror up to the follies of the powerful. A greedy senator might be thinly disguised as a buffoonish merchant in a comedy. A military blunder could be referenced in the lines of a Greek tragedy about hubris. The audience, savvy and engaged, would roar with laughter or nod in knowing recognition, participating in a shared critique that was permitted precisely because it was framed as entertainment. The authorities tolerated this within limits, understanding that the festival acted as a pressure valve, allowing controlled dissent to be released in the safety of the theater before it could boil over into the streets. It was a delicate, brilliant balance where art became a dialogue with power, and the crowd's applause was both a review of the performance and a subtle verdict on the state of their city. But the theater's satirical whispers and the arena's brutal clashes were not the limits of Roman spectacle. There existed a level of ambition so staggering it defied the very geography of the city, an event where the land itself was commanded to become the sea. This was the naumachia, a staged full-scale naval battle, and it stands as perhaps the single most jaw-dropping logistical feat in the history of entertainment. To understand its insanity, you must first erase the image of a simple flooded courtyard. This was the attempted replication of a Mediterranean war fleet, with all its chaos and carnage, in the heart of Rome. The first recorded naumachia was the brainchild of Julius Caesar, who dug a massive basin in the Campus Martius, but it was his successors who turned it into an art form of imperial arrogance. Emperor Augustus, to celebrate his dedication of the Temple of Mars altar, staged a battle involving 30 real warships, triremes and biremes, manned by 3,000 combatants. They were not actors but convicts and prisoners of war, given a stark choice: fight for the fleeting chance of pardon or drown. Decades later, Emperor Claudius outdid even this. For his naumachia, he chose a natural body of water, the Fucine Lake, about 50 miles east of Rome. The scale is almost incomprehensible. He assembled 2 full fleets of 50 ships each, manned by 19,000 condemned men. They reenacted a historical battle between the fleets of Rhodes and Sicily, employing actual naval tactics, ramming maneuvers, and boarding actions before an audience of countless spectators ringing the lakeshore. The engineering challenge alone was a multi-year project. For landlocked venues, it meant excavating a giant, waterproof basin, lining it with waterproof cement, and then solving the twin puzzles of filling and draining it. Aqueducts were tapped or diverted, their precious water channeled not to drinking fountains or baths, but to create a temporary ocean for a single day's slaughter. Then the ships themselves were these specially built lighter vessels constructed on site, or were actual heavy warships, symbols of Roman naval power, painstakingly transported overland, dragged by oxen on giant rolling logs from the coast to the capital. Either option represents a monstrous undertaking, The combat was terrifyingly real. These men were given weapons and basic training, then ordered to fight to the death or until one side was annihilated. The water churned by oars and the weight of the ships would quickly turn red and thick. There were no lifeboats, no surrender in the middle of the lake. If your ship was rammed and sank, you either drowned under the weight of your armor, were cut down in the water, or if you were exceptionally lucky, you might be spared by the emperor's clemency at the battle's end. The naumachia was the ultimate demonstration of power. It shouted that Rome could not only conquer the sea, but could then recreate the sea on demand, populating it with disposable human pieces to replay its victories for the entertainment of the citizenry. It was logistics, engineering, and human life all subordinated to a single, breathtaking, and profoundly grim statement. For the emperor who could stage an ocean, nothing was impossible. The echoes of clashing oars from the naumachia would finally fade, leaving a strange quiet in their wake. Yet the Roman crowd's appetite for wonder was never truly satisfied, and the architects of these festivals knew better than to let a moment of silence become boredom. Filling the gaps between the headline acts of chariots, gladiators, and mock naval battles was an entire world of professional enchantment, a supporting cast whose sole purpose was to ensure the spectacle never, ever stopped. This was the art of constant engagement, a Roman understanding that variety was the key to holding a city's attention. The most essential of these background artists were the musicians, the tibassines. Their music was not just entertainment, it was the sacred soundtrack to the entire festival. You would hear them first at dawn, their double red pipes, the tibii, emitting a sharp, piercing melody that accompanied every step of the sacrificial ritual, their notes believed to purify the air and please the gods. As the grand procession began, they were joined by the deep, brassy blare of the litus, a long, curved horn, and the rhythmic thump of drums. This wasn't a concert to sit and listen to, it was a pulse you moved to, a sonic current that physically guided the massive parade through the streets and told every participant precisely what stage of the ceremony they were in. Their role was so vital that a mistake in the ritual music could be seen as a bad omen, putting the entire day's events in jeopardy. But once the crowds were seated, a different kind of performer took the stage during the intermissions. These were the masters of motion and surprise. Acrobats and tumblers would sprint into the open space, forming human pyramids that swayed precariously to the gasps of the audience. Tightrope walkers, the funambuli, would perform daring feats high above the sand, often without a net, their balance a mesmerizing contrast to the brutal combat that had just taken place or was about to begin. Dancers, both solo and in troops, presented elaborate, story-driven performances, sometimes reenacting myths with graceful movements and flowing costumes. These acts served a crucial psychological purpose. They provided a palate cleanser, a moment of breathtaking skill and beauty that offered relief from the tension of the races or the grim finality of the arena, resetting the crowd's emotions for the next round of high-stakes drama. Then came the exotic displays, the living curiosities that showcased the empire's reach. While the morning beast hunts demonstrated Roman power over wild nature, the afternoon intermissions might feature a demonstration of control over it. Trained animals performed tricks that seemed to defy their very instincts. You might see a bear that could walk on its hind legs, a lion that allowed its keeper to place his head in its mouth, or dogs dressed in costumes performing complex routines. These acts blurred the line between the wild and the civilized, turning feared predators into objects of amusement. Even more captivating were the simple displays of rare creatures. A keeper might lead a lumbering rhinoceros or a tall, silent giraffe, an animal the Romans called a camela pardalis or camel leopard, on a slow walk around the track. For many citizens, this was their only chance to see the living proof of the distant, mysterious lands their legions had conquered. It was a traveling zoo and a circus act rolled into one, a direct, visceral connection to the empire's vastness. This relentless, layered programming was no accident. It was a calculated strategy of crowd management. By ensuring there was always something novel, skillful, or astonishing to watch, the organizers prevented the mass restlessness that could easily boil over into chaos. The festival was engineered as a total sensory immersion, a river of entertainment with no dry banks. From the sacred pipes at sunrise to the last tumbler's flip at dusk, every moment was choreographed to captivate, proving that Roman genius lay not just in staging epic battles, but in mastering the delicate, continuous art of wonder. This relentless spectacle of wonder was a powder keg waiting for a spark. For all its brilliant organization, the Roman festival lived on a knife's edge, its greatest vulnerability being the very crowd it was designed to please. The energy of 250,000 people, fueled by wine, gambling, and fanatical loyalty, could turn from joyous celebration to city-wide riot in a heartbeat. The most volatile flashpoint was the ancient rivalry between the Blues and the Greens, the chariot racing factions. This was not a friendly competition. It was a tribal identity, and a disputed finish or a perceived foul on the track could ignite violence that spilled from the Circus Maximus into the streets, with supporters clashing with clubs and stones, burning property, and chanting slogans against the emperor himself. Keeping this volatile human sea from drowning the city in chaos was a security operation as sophisticated as the games themselves. The first line of defense was the vigiles. We met them earlier as the unseen sanitation crews, but by night they were firemen, and by day during the festivals, they became Rome's de facto police force. These men, often freedmen, patrolled the packed avenues and the crowded tiers of the amphitheater. They were not soldiers, but they were organized into cohorts, armed with stout clubs and carrying buckets and hooks for firefighting. Their role was to break up fights, manage the flow of human traffic, and be the ever-present eyes of authority, deterring petty crime and keeping minor disputes from escalating. For more serious threats, the muscle was visibly present in the form of soldiers. Detachments from the urban cohorts, the city's permanent garrison, would be stationed at key points, their military armor and discipline a stark warning against large-scale disorder. On days when the emperor himself was in attendance, the elite Praetorian Guard, his personal bodyguards, would line the Imperial box and the routes to it, a silent, intimidating display of ultimate power. Their presence was a clear message. The state's generosity in providing entertainment would be met with the state's iron fist if that generosity was abused. But the Romans understood that the best way to control a crowd was to structure it before trouble could even begin. This philosophy was built right into the architecture. The seating in the cavea, the auditorium, was not first come, first served. It was a precise map of Roman society. The front rows closest to the action were reserved for senators, wearing their distinctive togas with the broad purple stripe. Behind them sat the equestrians, the wealthy business class, and then the ordinary citizens. The very back tiers or separate sections high up were for women, foreigners, and slaves. This segregation by class and gender did more than just reinforce social hierarchy. It prevented friction. A senator would never have to jostle with a common laborer for a seat, eliminating one potent source of daily resentment from the experience. Furthermore, the design of the venues themselves acted as a control mechanism. The Colosseum, for example, had 76 numbered public entrances, each corresponding to a specific seating section on your ticket, which was often a pottery shard with a section and row etched onto it. This brilliant system used the building's own skeleton to funnel people, like grain through a chute, directly to their assigned place. There was no milling about in a central concourse, no dangerous crush at a single gate. You entered your arch, climbed your designated staircase, and found your seat, all in a smooth, predetermined flow that minimized confusion and conflict. From the club-wielding vigile to the stone-etched ticket, every element was a calculated move in the ancient game of crowd psychology, proving that Rome's mastery of the masses was as much about subtle architecture and social engineering as it was about sheer force. Yet this delicate balance of crowd control and spectacle always had one final, ultimate arbiter. High above the teeming masses, in a special, lavishly decorated booth known as the pulvinar, sat the most important spectator of all, the emperor himself. His presence was not a passive act of watching, it was the climax of the political theater. The entire festival machinery, from the grain dole to the gladiatorial games, operated under a famous principle: panem et circenses, bread and circuses. This phrase, coined by the satirist Juvenal, was a cynical observation of a profound truth. By providing free food and dazzling entertainment, the state, and specifically the emperor, could keep the populace content, distracted, and loyal. But for the emperor, it was far more than simple distraction. It was a masterclass in propaganda, a live broadcast of his power and his generosity, his liberalitas. Every basket of bread distributed was a personal gift from him. Every thrilling race, every exotic beast, Every pardon granted to a fallen gladiator was a demonstration of his boundless wealth and his paternal care for his Roman children. The Povenar was his throne for this performance, positioned for the best view, often connected to the imperial palace by a private tunnel. It was a stage within the stage. When the emperor arrived, the entire crowd would rise and erupt in coordinated chants of praise. His every reaction, a nod, a smile, a gesture of mercy, was magnified and interpreted by hundreds of thousands. He was both the patron of the games and their primary audience, with the adoration of the mob being the ultimate prize. Some emperors understood this role with brilliant precision. Augustus, the first emperor, staged the magnificent Ludi Seculares, the secular games, in 17 BC. This was not a routine festival. It was a once-in-a-generation event meant to ceremonially close one great era of Rome and inaugurate a new golden age under his rule. For 3 days and nights, sacrifices were made to the gods of the underworld and of childbirth, symbolizing an end and a rebirth. Choirs of young boys and girls sang a specially commissioned hymn, composed by the poet Horace, praising the new peace and prosperity Augustus had brought. It was a breathtaking fusion of religion, culture, and politics, framing his reign as a divinely ordained fresh start for all of Rome. But other emperors dangerously blurred the line between patron and performer. The most infamous was Commodus, son of the philosopher King Marcus Aurelius. Commodus was obsessed with gladiatorial combat, not as a spectator, but as a participant. He would descend from the Povenar, enter the arena of the Colosseum, and fight as a gladiator. Of course, his matches were rigged. His opponents were given blunt weapons or were already weakened, and the outcome was never in doubt. He would then demand exorbitant payments from the state treasury for his victories. To the senatorial elite, this was a monstrous scandal, a degradation of the imperial office into a common entertainer. But to parts of the crowd, it was a surreal, thrilling spectacle, seeing their godlike emperor sharing the sand with them, demonstrating his martial prowess. It was the ultimate twisted expression of liberal leaders, where the emperor gave not just money or food, but the shocking gift of his own imperial person. Whether as a distant, godlike benefactor like Augustus or a hands-on combatant like Commodus, the emperor's role proved that the greatest show in Rome was always ultimately about him. The emperor's staged generosity from his Povenar was a brilliant fiction, but the real economy of the festival thrived in the shadowy spaces he could not, or would not, fully control. For every official spectacle of power, there existed a parallel world of illicit opportunity, a dark underbelly where fortunes were lost and lives were traded on the frantic energy of the crowd. The most pervasive shadow was gambling. Betting on the outcome of chariot races and gladiator fights was an obsession that crossed all social lines, from senators to slaves, despite being officially banned for much of Rome's history. The law was powerless against the tide of human nature. In the taverns surrounding the Circus Maximus, in the narrow alleys behind the theaters, and even in the stands themselves, a bustling black market and wagers operated in plain sight. Men would huddle, arguing odds before placing their bets with shady bankers who operated from makeshift tables. The stakes could be a few bronze coins or a family's entire savings. The thrill was not just in the race, but in the secret, nervous calculation happening in the crowd, where fans shout for his faction was also a desperate prayer for his financial survival. This illegal economy created a dangerous ripple effect. Debt from gambling losses could lead to theft, violence, or the selling of oneself or family members into slavery, all while the official games preached the virtues of Roman order just a few hundred feet away. The sheer density of the festival crowd, a sea of strangers flushed with excitement and often wine, created a perfect hunting ground for another ancient profession. Prostitution experienced a predictable, massive boom. Sex workers, both female and male, operated openly in the Popani, the lower-class taverns that stayed open all night, and in rented rooms near the major venues. For many visitors who had traveled far and spent their savings, the festival was a total escape, a chance to indulge in pleasures that might be monitored or frowned upon in their hometowns. The lines between entertainment services blurred. Some of the dancers and performers who entertained crowds between races might also offer more private companionship for the right price. This commerce was so expected it became a seamless, if unspoken, part of the festival ecosystem, a service industry catering to the temporary city of pleasure that Rome became. And where there are crowds, money, and lowered inhibitions, predators inevitably gather. The packed, chaotic streets were a paradise for pickpockets and con artists. A skilled cutpurse could melt into a jostling throng, slice the strings of a money pouch, and vanish before the victim felt the lighter weight at their belt. Con artists ran classic scams, selling fake tickets to already full events, or offering lucky amulets that guaranteed a win for your chosen gladiator, only to disappear with the payment. The general lawlessness could be startling. Brawls that started over gambling debts or faction rivalries could spill out of control. The vigiles, stretched thin across the entire city, could not be everywhere. For the average Roman family, especially those from out of town, the festival was a time of wondrous spectacle but also of heightened risk. You had to guard your purse closely, watch your children in the suffocating press of bodies, and navigate streets that turned dangerously chaotic once the sun went down. The festival was thus a double-edged reality. It was the state's glorious gift of bread and circuses, a display of supreme control, but it was also a temporary suspension of that control, an acknowledgement that within the carefully engineered framework of celebration, human nature, with all its vices, desperation, and cunning, would always find a way to write its own, much darker subplot. This shadow economy of vice and ambition was not confined to Rome's 7 hills. The very blueprint of the festival, that potent mix of spectacle, politics, and social control, was a master file the empire copied and pasted from one conquered shore to the next. From the damp mists of Britannia to the sun-baked sands of North Africa, the roar of the crowd became the sound of Romanization, a deliberate policy of cultural conquest. Wherever Rome planted its eagles, it soon planted the foundations of an amphitheater or a circus. In the provincial capital of Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon in France, a grand amphitheater hosted games to honor the emperor. In the bustling city of Carthage, rebuilt by Rome on the ashes of its old rival, a colossal circus echoed with the thunder of chariot teams, and in the remote frontier town of Veronum in modern Austria, a stone theater provided a stage for Roman plays far from the Italian heartland. These were not just venues for entertainment, they were permanent, unmovable statements carved in local stone. They taught conquered peoples how to be Roman, not through the sword alone, but through shared experience. A Gaulish chieftain's son, watching a tragedy about the Trojan War, was being schooled in the mythical ancestry that all Romans claimed. A Berber merchant in Leptis Magna, cheering for the blue faction in the local circus, was participating in a loyalty that now bound him to fans in Rome itself. The festival model became a universal language, a script for being part of the empire. Provincial elites quickly learned to read this script, and they saw in it a path to power and prestige that mirrored the climb of a Roman aedile. In cities like Ephesus in Asia Minor or Gades in Spain, the wealthiest local families, often descendants of the old ruling class, realized that sponsoring games was their ticket to acceptance and influence. They would use their fortunes, amassed from local vineyards, olive oil presses, or shipping, to fund a day of gladiatorial combats or theatrical performances in honor of the emperor. This was a brilliant exchange. The local magnate, called a munerius or editor, bought immense social capital. He would have his name inscribed on stone plaques commemorating the event. He would sit in the place of honor during the games, and he would bask in the applause of his fellow citizens. In return, Rome gained a stable, invested partner. This provincial editor became a pillar of the imperial system, using his own wealth to foster Roman identity and loyalty in his hometown, easing the burden on the distant central treasury. His ambition was channeled into supporting the very culture that had conquered him, creating a powerful class of local rulers with a vested interest in the empire's continuation. The festival, therefore, was not merely exported, it was franchised, creating a network of cultural outposts that constantly reinforced what it meant to be under Rome's rule. Yet this unifying practice carried a heavy, implicit threat. The games in the provinces were often tied directly to the imperial cult, the worship of the emperor and Rome as divine entities. A day at the amphitheater was frequently a religious obligation, a show of loyalty to a distant god-king whose representatives were watching. The choice of performers itself was a lesson in imperial hierarchy. The gladiators and exotic beasts in a provincial arena were often prisoners of war or tributes from the very edges of the empire, sometimes from neighboring regions the local population knew. To see them paraded and defeated was a stark, recurring reminder of Rome's overwhelming power and the fate of those who resisted it. For a community recently pacified, the games were a spectacular display of who was in charge, a visceral demonstration that the legion's authority did not end on the battlefield, but extended into the very leisure time of the conquered. It was soft power backed by an unmistakably hard edge. The shared experience could foster a common Roman identity, but it was an identity defined by Rome, imposed from above, and celebrated in structures that dominated the local skyline. The spread of the festival machine thus wove the Mediterranean world together with threads of shared spectacle, but the pattern it embroidered was always, unmistakably, the face of Rome. The empire's unifying spectacle was also a deliberate assault on the senses. To step into Rome during a major festival was to surrender yourself to a world of overwhelming, chaotic intensity, a place where sound, smell, and sight competed in a relentless battle for your attention. The first and most constant force was the noise. It began as a distant hum from 100,000 throats, a vibration you felt in your sandals before you heard it. As you neared the Circus Maximus, that hum fractured into a roaring cacophony. The crowd was not a single voice but a storm of them, chanting for the blues or the greens, screaming curses at a rival driver, or gasping in unison as chariots hurtled toward the deadly turn. Cutting through this human thunder were the sharp, commanding blasts of the litus horns, signaling the start of a race or the arrival of a dignitary. Beneath it all lay a constant grinding percussion, the rumble of wooden wheels on stone, the crash of a chariot wreck, the distant, terrified roar of a caged lion being moved toward the amphitheater. This was not a soundtrack, it was a physical environment you had to shout to be heard over, a wall of sound that left your ears ringing for hours after you went home. Then came the smells, an invisible tapestry that told its own story of the festival. The most immediate scent was human, the sharp, salty tang of 250,000 bodies packed under the relentless sun, a collective animal heat. This base odor was constantly challenged by others. Wafting from the altars in the forum was the sweet, smoky perfume of burning incense and sacrificial herbs, a sacred aroma meant to purify. From the labyrinth of temporary cookshops came the irresistible, greasy smell of roasting pork sausages, frying fish cakes, and warm flatbread, a promise of sustenance that made your stomach growl. But just as you breathed in that tempting scent, the wind could shift, delivering the pungent, earthy reek of animal dung from the stables and holding pens, or the metallic hint of blood from the butchering blocks near the temples. And weaving through it all, if you were near the wealthy seats, was the occasional, startlingly expensive cloud of imported perfume, myrrh or saffron, worn by elite patrons to separate themselves from the common olfactory fray. Your nose became a guide, telling you where you were in the social and physical landscape of the festival, from the sacred to the profane, from the kitchen to the latrine. The visual spectacle was a calculated barrage of color and motion, designed to stun you into awe. Everywhere you looked, there was a claim on your eyes. Above the teeming crowds, the bold banners of the racing factions snapped in the breeze, brilliant swaths of blue, green, red, and white that turned fans into a living mosaic of loyalty. On the track, the charioteers themselves were flashes of their faction's color, their muscles straining as they urged their teams forward in a blur of dust and gleaming horseflesh. In the amphitheater, the visual language shifted to brutal contrast. The pale, hot sand of the arena floor was periodically stained with dark, spreading patches, a stark testament to the morning's hunts or the afternoon's duels. Against this neutral canvas moved the gladiators, their armor and helmets polished to a high shine, catching the sun with every movement. A Murmillo's bronze helmet crest, shaped like a fish, would glint as he raised his shield, while the Retiarius darted like a silver-scaled eel, his trident a deadly, glinting fork. Gilded statues of gods looked down impassively from the spina of the circus or the arches of the theater, their metallic sheen a constant reminder of divine witnesses to the human drama below. Elaborate costumes for priests and actors added to the riot, with purple-edged robes, feathered headdresses, and painted theatrical masks creating a moving gallery of the mythical and the majestic. This was a world without visual rest, where every glance offered a new detail, a new symbol, a new shock of beauty or violence, meticulously orchestrated to ensure you could never look away. The overwhelming spectacle was a masterpiece of control, but control is always an illusion. For all its planning and power, the Roman festival system was a machine with countless moving parts, and when one gear sheared, the result was not mere disappointment, but catastrophe on an epic scale. The line between magnificent success and horrific tragedy was terrifyingly thin, and history is littered with moments when the machinery of joy ground to a halt in screams and rubble. One of the most chilling examples happened not in Rome itself, but just a few miles north in the town of Fidene during the reign of Emperor Tiberius. An ambitious freedman, eager to gain prestige, decided to build a temporary wooden amphitheater to host gladiatorial games. The demand for seats was enormous, and in his rush for profit and glory, he cut every corner. The foundations were shallow, the timber was green and unseasoned, and the scaffolding was lashed together with haste rather than skill. As thousands packed into the rickety structure, the groaning of the wood was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Then, with a sound like thunder, the entire edifice gave way. The wooden beams snapped, the tiers of seating collapsed inward, and in a chaotic avalanche of splintered timber and crushing bodies, an estimated 20,000 people were killed or maimed in an instant. The news reached Rome like a physical blow. The disaster was so profound it prompted the Senate to pass immediate regulations, barring anyone with a fortune below a certain level from holding gladiatorial games, in a desperate attempt to prevent such reckless, underfunded ventures from ever happening again. It was a stark lesson that in the race for popular favor, cheap construction could carry the ultimate price. The danger was not confined to poor craftsmanship. The very soul of the festival, the passionate rivalry of the factions, could ignite a fire far more destructive than any on a stage. Centuries later, in the year 532, in the eastern Roman capital of Constantinople, this simmering tension exploded in the Nika riots. It began as so many conflicts did in the hippodrome during the chariot races. Supporters of the blue and green factions, normally bitter enemies, found a common cause in their hatred of the Emperor Justinian and his oppressive taxes. Their chants quickly turned from support for their teams to outright rebellion. Nika, they chanted, meaning conquer. The riots spilled out of the arena and engulfed the city for 5 days. Fires set by the mob raged uncontrollably, reducing entire neighborhoods, including the original Hagia Sophia Church, to smoldering ruins. Tens of thousands were killed before Justinian's generals finally trapped the rioters back in the hippodrome and slaughtered them to the last man. While this happened in the later empire, it was the terrifying culmination of a pattern born in Rome itself, proving that the crowd's energy, so carefully harnessed for entertainment, could become an unstoppable force of annihilation. And then there was the ever-present primal threat of fire itself. These festivals were cities of wood and canvas, packed with oil lamps, cooking braziers, and thousands of careless sparks. A single overturned lamp in a vendor's stall, a stray ember from a sacrificial altar, could spell doom. Temporary theaters, with their dry timber and painted cloth scenery, were particularly vulnerable. A fire could race through such a structure in minutes, trapping spectators in a deadly inferno with few avenues for escape. The vigiles were ever vigilant, their buckets and hooks always at the ready, but against a major blaze in a packed district, their efforts were often a desperate, losing battle. These disasters, from collapsing stands to raging fires to murderous riots, were the dark shadow of the Roman genius for spectacle. They remind us that behind the gleaming armor and the cheering crowds, these events were a perpetual high-wire act, a dance with chaos where the price of a misstep was measured not in coins, but in countless lives. The final roar of the crowd faded into an eerie, hollow silence. The stands were empty, the sand was still, and the city was left with the staggering physical reality of its own celebration. The festival was over, but the work had just begun. The monumental task of cleaning up was an operation nearly as complex as staging the games themselves. It started in the dead of night, under the dim light of oil lamps. An army of slaves and public workers descended upon the venues, their movements a stark contrast to the day's frantic energy. In the Circus Maximus, teams began the methodical dismantling of the temporary wooden bleachers that had been erected for extra seating. The sound of hammers now pulled nails instead of driving them, as the great timbers were carefully lowered and carted away for storage or reuse. In the Forum, the elaborate painted stage fronts of the temporary theaters were taken apart, their canvas backdrops rolled up, their wooden columns stacked like giant kindling. Then came the waste, tons of it. The cleanup crews waded through a knee-deep sea of discarded food, shattered pottery cups, gnawed bones, and rotting garlands. They shoveled it into carts that made endless trips to the city's dumping grounds beyond the walls. The smell, once a vibrant mix of incense and cooking meat, now curdled into a sour, overwhelming stench of decay. In the amphitheater, the most grim task awaited. The sand of the arena, stained dark from the day's combat, had to be purified. Workers would rake it thoroughly, removing any debris before a fresh layer of clean, pale sand was hauled in and spread evenly, ready to absorb the next day's drama. For a naumachia, the process was even more immense. The giant man-made lake had to be drained, a slow, sucking process that left behind a muddy pit littered with broken oars and other wreckage, all of which had to be cleared before the basin could be refilled for the next imperial whim. As the physical mess was cleared, the human economy of the festival settled its accounts. In the dim back rooms of the gladiator schools, the wounded received what care was available. A talented, valuable fighter might be treated by a skilled medicus, his wounds stitched with linen thread and treated with honey and vinegar. A less fortunate, gravely injured slave might be left to fate, his value written off by his owner. In the taverns and popani, vendors counted their profits, the clink of coins a sweet sound after days of exhausting labor. The more successful ones had earned enough to support their families for months. Meanwhile, in shadowed corners, the underworld of the festival collected its due. Gambling debts contracted in the heat of the moment now came due. Those who could not pay faced brutal consequences, from broken limbs to forced servitude, a dark epilogue to the day's public thrill. By the next morning, the city began its slow return to normal. The streets were passable again, the market sold ordinary goods, and the rhythm of daily work resumed. But the festival left indelible marks. For the presiding magistrate, the aedile, the real accounting began in the court of public opinion. A brilliantly successful games could launch him toward the consulship, his name forever associated with generosity and competence. A failed or stingy spectacle, however, would haunt him, a political stain he might never wash clean. For the average citizen, the memories linger like a vivid dream. The thrill of a last-minute victory by the Greens, the shocking mercy shown to a brave gladiator, the taste of free meat. These moments became stories to be told and retold at the public baths and the local fountain, binding the community in shared experience. The city had consumed its spectacle, digested its chaos, and now carried the memory within it, already beginning to hunger for the next date, marked in red on the sacred calendar. That lingering memory of shared spectacle found its most radical expression not in the summer sun, but in the heart of winter's darkness. The festival of Saturnalia, held each December, was Rome's most beloved and bizarre institution, a week-long explosion of sanctioned chaos that turned the rigid social order completely inside out. As the days grew shortest around the solstice, Romans celebrated Saturn, an ancient god of agriculture and a mythical king from a lost golden age, a time of abundance and equality. To honor this, they recreated that age, but with a wild, mischievous spirit that revealed a profound understanding of human nature. The rules of daily life were not just relaxed, they were ceremoniously inverted. For the duration of the festival, the master of the house became the servant. Wealthy senators would prepare a feast and then wait on their own slaves, who were invited to recline at the table, eat the finest foods, and give orders to their owners. This was not a quiet formality, it was a loud, raucous affair. A lord of misrule, the Saturnalicious princeps, was often chosen from among the lowliest members of the household. This temporary king could issue absurd and humorous commands that everyone, master and slave alike, was obliged to follow, creating a carnival atmosphere where the normal chains of command were made into a joke. In the streets, another powerful symbol of normalcy was suspended. Gambling, usually illegal for common citizens, was not only permitted but encouraged in public. You would see groups of men gathered on street corners, dice rattling in cups, playing for small stakes without fear of the law, and everyone from the highest patrician to the humblest laborer shed their formal attire. They exchanged the restrictive toga for a simple, colorful Greek-style cloak called the synthesis, and most tellingly, they wore the pileus, the conical felt cap that was the symbol of a freed slave. For a few days, every citizen visually proclaimed a state of symbolic freedom, a powerful, shared costume that erased social markers. Gift-giving was a central joy, though the presents reflected the topsy-turvy mood. Instead of lavish offerings, people exchanged simple, often humorous tokens. Wax candles signifying the return of light after the solstice were common, as were small clay figurines and written jokes or poems. The feasts were legendary, stretching late into the night with abundant wine and music, but the menu itself was a nod to the rustic past, featuring foods like pork and legumes associated with Saturn's simpler age. This entire glorious mess functioned as the empire's ultimate pressure valve. By formally and temporarily releasing the immense tensions built into a slave-owning, class-obsessed society, Saturnalia actually reinforced the system the rest of the year. It gave the disenfranchised a taste of power and recognition, and it allowed the powerful to demonstrate a calculated, benevolent flexibility. The message was clear: for these few days, we acknowledge the strain of our hierarchy, and we release it together in a controlled explosion of merriment, so that when the festival ends and the pileous caps are put away, we can all return to our places without rebellion. The organization of Saturnalia was a different kind of genius, one that understood that sometimes the best way to maintain perfect order is to plan for a perfect, beautiful disorder. But this scheduled chaos of Saturnalia was a festival of the people. For the ultimate expression of state-controlled, religiously precise spectacle, we must look to an event so rare it was considered a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon. The Ludi Seculares, the secular games, were not meant for mere entertainment. They were a sacred reset button for the entire Roman state, a meticulously choreographed ritual to close one great age and inaugurate the next. The concept of a saeculum was a Roman measurement of time, roughly the longest possible human lifespan, calculated at 110 years. Only once in that immense span would the games be held, meaning no citizen would ever witness them twice. This rarity alone made them an event of profound, almost mystical significance. The planning for this generational pivot fell not to ambitious politicians, but to the most elite priestly college in Rome, the Quindecimviri Sacris Faciundis, the 15 men for performing sacred rites. Their task was not to please a crowd, but to negotiate with the very fabric of time and fate, ensuring the gods would grant Rome another century of prosperity. The rituals they designed were a marathon of precision, unfolding over 3 days and 3 nights, a solemn counterpoint to the raucous energy of the circus. The ceremonies began not at dawn, but in the deep darkness. On the first night, the 15 priests led a solemn procession to the Campus Martius. There, at a special underground altar, they made offerings of dark-colored victims, a pregnant soul, to the mysterious fates, the Moirai, and to the goddess of childbirth, Ilithea. This was a ritual of ending and beginning, honoring the deities who spun the thread of life, measured it and cut it, while also invoking safe passage into the new age. The sacrifice was performed in utter silence, a powerful, eerie contrast to the typical festival roar, emphasizing that this was a conversation with the deepest forces of the universe. The second night shifted the focus to the underworld and the earth's bounty. The procession moved to the Capitoline Hill, where sacrifices were made to the chthonic gods, the deities of the earth and the dead. The offerings here were again dark animals, and the prayers pleaded for the fertility of the soil and the stability of the state, acknowledging the dark foundational powers that supported Roman glory. Finally, on the third day, the rituals burst into the light. Now the sacrifices were made to Jupiter and Juno on the Capitoline, and to Apollo and Diana on the Palatine Hill. These were daytime ceremonies with white noble victims, bulls and cows, their pure colors symbolizing the new radiant age to come. The entire city was invited to witness this climax, a public declaration that the dangerous nighttime negotiations with fate and the underworld had been successful, and the sun could now rise on a renewed Rome. But the most hauntingly beautiful element was the music. For these games, the state commissioned a unique hymn, the Carmen Seculaire. The poet Horace was tasked with writing it, and it was performed by a choir of 27 boys and 27 girls, all from intact citizen families, symbolizing the pure future of the state. This choir, standing in their pristine white robes, sang the complex Latin verses to Apollo and Diana, their young voices carrying the hopes of an empire across the silent, attentive crowds. The hymn was not just a prayer, it was a piece of state propaganda set to music, directly linking the new age to the ruling emperor, Augustus, who had revived the tradition. Every gesture, every word, every choice of victim and deity in this three-day symphony was prescribed by ancient ritual texts the priests consulted. There was no room for improvisation. A single mispronounced prayer, an animal that stumbled at the wrong moment, could be interpreted as a dreadful omen, suggesting the gods were rejecting Rome's plea for renewal. The pressure on the 15 priests was immense, far greater than any faced by an aedile spending his fortune. They were not risking political failure, but potentially the fate of the civilization for the next century. The Ludi Romani represent the absolute peak of Roman festival organization, where logistics served theology, and the entertainment was the breathtaking, solemn theater of eternity itself. The solemn hymns of the secular games sought to echo through eternity, but their true legacy is written in the stadium lights and crowded plazas of our own time. We may not sacrifice bulls to Jupiter, but the ghost of the Roman festival organizer lives on in every event planner facing a crowd of 100,000. The challenges they mastered are eerily familiar. Think of the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. It is a global pompa, a procession of nations instead of gods, where the presiding state stages a breathtaking narrative of its history and power on a budget that would make a Roman aedile blush. The funding models mirror ancient Rome's complex blend of public treasury and private sponsorship. The security apparatus, with its layers of checkpoints and surveillance, is our high-tech version of the vigiles and urban cohorts tasked with preventing a modern-day Nika riot. Even the temporary transformation of a city, with its pop-up venues and strained infrastructure, is a direct descendant of Rome's seasonal metamorphosis. This lineage points to the most enduring phrase to escape the Circus Maximus, panem et circenses, bread and circuses. The satirist Juvenal coined it to lament a populace that had traded its political voice for full bellies and thrilling distractions. Today we use it as a shorthand for a dangerous political bargain, where superficial entertainment and short-term benefits are offered in place of substantive governance or difficult truths. It is a warning that feels perpetually relevant, whether it is a massive national holiday spectacle funded by the state to bolster unity, or a populist political rally designed like a rock concert. The dynamic remains. The offering of collective joy and identity in exchange for loyalty is a thread woven from the Roman Forum to the modern capital. Our festivals, from sprawling music events like Coachella to the global frenzy of the World Cup, are not just entertainment. They are profound social rituals. They answer the same needs Roman festivals did: a craving for shared experience, a release from daily toil, and a story about who we are collectively. So we must ask the same question of our Colosseums that we ask of Rome's. What do our spectacles say about us? The Roman Games reflected a society obsessed with hierarchy, martial virtue, and divine favor, where life was cheap and power was absolute. Our modern equivalents broadcast different values, but they are values nonetheless. A globally televised sports championship celebrates meritocracy, teamwork, and national pride. A music festival built around sustainability and inclusivity promotes ideals of community and environmental consciousness. A state-sponsored digital light show might celebrate technological achievement. Yet the underlying machinery often reveals the same old pressures. The exorbitant cost of tickets mirrors ancient social segregation through wealth. The environmental toll of a temporary city of festival goers echoes the waste management crises of ancient Rome, and the potential for corporate sponsorship to overshadow the art itself recalls the way Roman games became advertisements for political ambition. The genius and the flaw of the Roman system was its recognition of a fundamental human truth: people need to gather to feel part of something larger and to be awed. Their solution was a breathtaking, brutal, and brilliantly organized engine of wonder. We have inherited that engine, even if we have swapped gladiators for guitarists and chariots for halftime shows. The next time you find yourself in a vast crowd feeling the collective pulse of anticipation, look beyond the stage, see the invisible architecture of control, the river of money, and the silent calculations of risk. You are participating in a tradition as old as empire itself, a ritual where society plays out its dreams and its tensions on a grand, communal stage. The real spectacle is not just what happens in the light, but the immense hidden effort to make it possible, and the enduring question of what we, the audience, are truly being asked to celebrate. The grandeur of these festivals is undeniable, yet for all we have reconstructed, thick veils of mystery still shroud the practicalities. Take the Colosseum's legendary naval battles. We know they happened, but the precise mechanics of flooding that vast arena remain a tantalizing puzzle. Did engineers use a complex system of sluice gates connected to the nearby Aqua Claudia aqueduct, filling the basement in hours, or was the entire hypogeum, the underground network, sealed with waterproof mortar to create a shallow basin? The truth is, we are still piecing it together from drains and sediment layers, a reminder that Roman engineering often outpaced even its own records. Equally perplexing is the split-second coordination of the Circus Maximus. With up to 12 chariots lunging from the starting gates, how did they ensure a fair start? The dropping of the magistrates' white cloth, the mappa, was the signal, but what invisible system of ropes, pulleys, and gatekeepers worked in flawless unison to release those frantic teams at the exact same instant? One miscue meant chaos and death on the first turn. The silence of the sources on these details is itself a kind of echo, a challenge to our modern assumptions about their capabilities. These mysteries bleed directly into heated scholarly debates that reshape our view of the games. Perhaps the most persistent question surrounds the gladiators. Was every fight a bloody duel to the death? The evidence suggests a far more nuanced and economically savvy reality. Gladiators were immense investments, trained for years at great cost. Their managers had no desire to see that asset destroyed needlessly. Most combats likely ended with a wounded fighter yielding, his fate then decided by the editor and the crowd. Death was a possibility, even a frequent one, but not an inevitability. Epitaphs for gladiators who survived dozens of fights suggest a career more akin to a brutal, high-stakes sport than a constant slaughter. Similarly, we might question the true effectiveness of all that crowd control. The segregated seating and numerous gates were impressive, but the historical record is also full of riots, stampedes, and collapses. The system was designed for order, but the raw, primal energy of 250,000 people often defied the best-laid plans. How many times did the vigiles simply watch, overwhelmed, as a brawl between faction fans spilled through the streets? The official blueprint projected control, but the lived experience was surely messier. Our understanding is not static, it evolves with every shovelful of earth. Modern archaeology continues to act as a silent witness, correcting the boasts of ancient texts. Consider the animal hunts. Roman writers loved to list impossible numbers of slain beasts, 9,000 animals in a single day. But recent excavations of bone deposits from the Colosseum's drainage systems tell a more sober, though still staggering story. Analysis of lion, bear, and even ostrich bones reveals these animals were often young, sick, or malnourished by their long journey. The spectacle was real, but the odds were brutally stacked, a managed display of dominance rather than a fair fight. Other digs uncover the humble remains of the festival's underbelly, mountains of discarded oyster shells and cheap pottery from the Papani, mapping the vibrant street economy that fed the masses. Each broken lamp, each gaming die, each ticket token pulled from the soil adds a pixel to our picture. These physical fragments force us to listen not just to the roar of the emperor and the crowd, but to the clatter of the vendor's stall and the anxious rattle of dice in a gambler's hand. The story of the Roman festival is not a closed book written in marble, but a living manuscript still being unearthed and interpreted, one buried mystery at a time. From the sacred calendar's first announcement to the final cartload of waste hauled beyond the city walls, this was a journey of staggering human ambition. The Romans did not just throw parties, they engineered entire temporary worlds, mastering the three pillars that hold any civilization together: logistics, politics, and the human heart. They built feats of engineering not only in stone, but in time and emotion, choreographing the movement of food, animals, and 250,000 people with a precision that feels almost modern. They turned political ambition into a public fuel, where a magistrate's personal fortune could be gambled on the mood of a crowd, and an emperor's nod from the Pulvinar could shape the destiny of the state. Most brilliantly, they understood psychology. They knew that a society needs shared stories, that tension requires release, and that loyalty can be woven from the threads of collective awe. These festivals were never mere entertainment. They were the vital, beating heart of Roman statecraft, a dialogue with the gods written in smoke and sacrifice, and the most powerful glue for social cohesion the ancient world ever devised. So the next time you stand in a crowded stadium or lose yourself in a city-wide celebration, listen closely. Beneath the modern noise, you might still hear the echo of that ancient, organized roar, the sound of the Circus Maximus at full cry, a testament to a genius for spectacle that shaped an empire and still whispers to us today. If you could step back in time, which Roman festival would you choose to witness? Would you brave the chaotic crowds for the heart-stopping chariot races, or experience the surreal social inversion of Saturnalia? Let us know in the comments below.